Step back, puts up the three, got hit, shot's good, and one! James Harden double team, and a chance for a 4-point play.
Okay, welcome back to the DC Pod. I'm Christian, joined as always by Dallas Diehard Darcy, where we cover all things basketball. Now, it's barely been a week since we last did a pod, but so much has happened to us, and we are recording this on Wednesday, the 4th of August in the afternoon. So we want to hit on a few things that have taken place, but something that happened as of this morning was a few deals that went down with Australians in particular. And given the relevance of that they're currently in Tokyo playing for the Boomers. First, Patty Mills gone to Brooklyn, then Jock Landale gets his opportunity to show his stuff in the NBA, signing with the Spurs. So just before we get into any of the topics we want to hit on today, what do you make of those two signings?
Great fit, great signing for Patty Mills in Brooklyn. I think it'd be a joy. It sounds like a great opportunity for him to go play with Steve Nash as the coach. They're playing such a free, open style. He's going to get so many open looks from three. I just think if it was him in that position rather than potentially Joe Harris had a lot of times last year, I like Patty's chances. You know, he's a real clutch player. Obviously, he's a bit smaller and not as strong defensively, but he's proved his whole career, especially in the last 5 years, how consistent he can be as a scorer and an off the bench guy. So love that fit for him in Brooklyn. Another potential chance at a championship run, which would be awesome for Patty. And then, you know, ecstatic about the news for Jock Landale. Not only is he going to the NBA, but he's going to be coached by Greg Popovich, you know, one of the best franchises in the NBA last few years. And with the moves that they've made, the Spurs, I think that he could potentially be a starter next year. It depends, you know, just how their roster shapes out. But at the power forward position, Rudy Gay's out the door, you know, DeRozan's out the door. Jock Landale's looking like potentially a starting power forward for the Spurs next year. It's great news.
Yeah, 100%. And also, obviously, LaMarcus Aldridge had left midway through of last year as well. So as you say, there's a lot of opportunity there. The only big man you can think of off the bat is Big Jakob Poeltl as the only mainstay there. So obviously getting Jock in, I'm sure he could play the 4. I'm not sure if that's his position or if it's the 5 in the NBA. It'd be interesting to see how he sort of fits in. Have been some people that have been questioning how he looks really good in FIBA. There's no doubting that, but how can he transition to the NBA where, you know, I'm sure the second he takes the court, oppositions will be calling for ISOs to try and put him on an island and really test his defensive ability. So he deserves the opportunity. I think that's what we come back to, and we're really excited to see him match it with the best. I think he was by far who got MVP for the NBL? Was it Bryce?
What?
No, but he was for the finals. Who was the regular season?
Cotton.
Okay, it was Cotton. Okay, there you go. So anyway, he obviously performed well enough at the biggest stage in the NBL, which is obviously no scrub of a league. We're not being biased in saying that. So excited for his opportunity. And the only point I'd mention other than what you hit on with Patty Mills is I can almost guarantee that it had something to do with the Sean Marks connection, because Sean Marks obviously came from the Spurs and he worked in the front office there after his playing days. So I'm sure that being able, that connection and to speak to Patty helped, bring him on board, because it was the Lakers and I think as well Golden State were rumored to be in the sweepstakes for Patty Mills. So interesting he decided to go with the Nets. If you have Golden State and the Lakers, are you personally, Das, choosing the Nets?
I think so. I think they're probably the favorites above the other two, just given the 3 superstars that they have. Obviously, the Lakers have made a big move now, but if you choose to go Lakers route, you become one of LeBron's cronies in a lot of ways. And it seems a little bit different, the vibe there in Brooklyn. I think it's a great fit, a new coach. They're an exciting team. I think that would be the most fun situation. Yeah,
I agree. I like it. I really do like it. Don't like it as a Philly fan, but like it as just a basketball fan overall. So the draft, us. Now, that's one of the things that we mentioned off the top that we obviously want to discuss today. And we were mentioning before the pod, it wasn't even 5 days ago that the draft took place, but given how quick things are moving with NBA news and the Olympics, it already feels like it's yesterday's news. But we wanted to obviously hit on a couple of things that we saw from that draft. Obviously, we did a bit of a preview in the build up to it and picked out a bit of I think we each picked 2 prospects that we liked the look of. I can't remember if I had this guy, but I'm happy to kick it off with our sort of one reaction each. And the guy I'm focusing on is Book Knight. You might have spoken about him a little bit, but it goes to overall the Charlotte draft. And I thought they did really well. I kind of didn't expect them as to be able to add too much to the roster to help improve. I thought their way to getting better was trying to acquire a big man through a trade or trying to sign a big man in free agency is their real area of concern. But when Book Knight fell to him at 11, it sort of made too much sense because he was rumored to go to OKC at 6, and he was also potentially rumored to be picked up somewhere else there in the back stages of that top 10. So the fact that he fell to 11, I think it kind of, the pick made itself for Charlotte, and sometimes that's the case in the draft. But I just think as an individual, he's obviously got potential to be, a 3-level scorer, and he fits really nicely next to LaMelo. And I know there was criticism about Book Knight's shooting at college, but obviously it's been revealed that, and if you watched any of the games with UConn, that while yes, it's the case, the numbers don't lie, his shooting percentages were pretty poor. He was asked to do everything, and that's when with very little talent surrounding him. So look, I'm very curious to see how that fit goes in particular. And immediately we sort of saw a couple of guys be expendable as a result from the Charlotte side of things, with Devontae Graham, who I'll actually speak about in the free agency segment. And obviously Malik Monk was left town as well. So interesting how Charlotte's moving forward with their backcourt. They then made a pick at 19, Kai Jones, the big man out of Texas. So they traded a future first to the Knicks to be able to get the number 19 pick, Das, and that was heavily protected. So I can't criticize giving up a future first for, going to get a guy that you want. And this is obviously a player that's an elite athlete and can run the floor and jump out of the gym. So immediately comes to mind as a lob threat. Again, this all comes back to Book Knight and him. None of this is probably looking too great if you don't have a guy like LaMelo Ball on your team whose, vision and passing is obviously the, elite of elite. So I think that prospect of him being a lob threat with LaMelo is obviously tantalizing. He does need to develop in some areas defensively and potentially become a little bit more of a rim protector. Does seem to have tendencies to get in foul trouble. So obviously he's a little bit of a raw prospect in that aspect, but I think overall this is clearly, a prospect that has a lot of upside, and it's a move I don't mind Charlotte sort of going out and getting, because they also did trade for Plumlee, right? They traded for Mason Plumlee.
Yes.
So he's not expected to come in and be the, the main man running the 5 position from day one. So he can learn a bit and come off the bench and really excel in that role. So overall, I guess I was really surprised by Charlotte draft because I wasn't expecting too much. So I was impressed.
I agree with that grade. I think they did a really good job. Book Knight falling to them is, that's a great fit. They've got lots of shooting. They showed that they're willing to stretch the floor significantly and shoot a lot of threes. And I feel like he's a heat check guy as much as anyone in this draft. He really can shoot the ball when he's going. So nice fit for them. And you're right, they needed to get some athleticism and some defense in the front court. And given trading away that draft pick to get Kai Jones, I think could work out for them. Definitely. Cody Zeller's on the move. They brought in Plumlee to give them someone who can do a little bit inside and can play athletically above the rim. So I like it. They're in a pretty strong situation, and from the draft prospects, they did well with what they had. We weren't expecting them to be a big player with them falling that 11th pick, and they did a pretty good job. I think for me, the team that I wanted to focus on was probably the first shock of the draft was at the number 4 spot with Toronto. So they went with Scotty Barnes, and a lot of people thought Jalen Suggs was a shoo-in, given his potential to potentially be the number 1 guy in this draft, considering how dominant he was in college and how much of an all-round athlete and just a leader and playmaker Jalen Suggs is. He ends up falling to Orlando at 5, but Scotty Barnes, when they make that pick, you instantly think, why did they go with this guy? What's so special about this Scotty Barnes guy? He's a 6'8" wing with a 7'3" wingspan, and really got the potential to be the best defender in this draft. So he's a guy who's played with USA Basketball, been in national junior teams multiple times, won gold medals, and he definitely has elite 2-way upside. So Toronto, they're looking like a pretty smart pick here, potentially finding a player in the mold of a guy like OG Anunoby who could turn into an exceptional athlete who's been around a winning culture and coming into a team who's not really the typical team that you see at pick number 4 in the draft. They're a team who are actually pretty well built and they're pretty much ready to go. Obviously, the big news yesterday with Kyle Lowry being on the move, you now kind of look at their lineup and they're a little bit thin at that point guard position, but they did draft Malachi Flynn in the first round last year, and he got some good reps under him last year. So they expect him to step up, and obviously Van Vliet becomes the main ball handler. And they don't go with Suggs; they go with Barnes. So they try to add some length and some defensive wings, which pretty much every team is looking for. If Barnes can develop into a bit of a shooter, this could be a really nice pick at number 4.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think the couple of interesting points there is if Toronto knew that, because I know they like to say that, teams are abide by the rules and there's no tampering, but fair chance they knew, coming into this offseason that Lowry probably wasn't going to stay with them. That even makes it more interesting, probably them knowing that they didn't take Suggs, who was, probably the ideal replacement there in the backcourt. I think what you mentioned there about Scotty Barnes and obviously his defensive ability already coming into the league and how he can grow in that area as well as offensively is, I wonder if they're sort of foreshadowing down the line that potentially Siakam could be on the move. And there they'd probably look to put OG at the 4 and maybe have Scotty Barnes as that, number 3 guy, small forward moving forward. Heading into the future, running with that. So interesting. I also thought that, they potentially could have addressed the big man spot because that seems to be a little bit of a hole with them with
Absolutely.
Obviously Baines not performing the way you'd like him to as, an Australian, and then Boucher, I'm not sure his how viable it is to have him as a starting center. I know he seems to play his best ball when he comes in spurts and can just be so active and be all over the court, getting blocks, running the floor. And when he's hitting the 3, obviously is, becomes almost unguardable at certain stages. So I think Toronto at the end, you can't really be too against it, the thinking anyway. And given their history with being able to develop guys, whether it be undrafted or drafted, you probably just have to give them the benefit of the doubt and see how it goes. And the good thing with Scotty Barnes is I think Toronto do have enough around him at the moment anyway to really take the pressure off Barnes and let him come along at his own pace. I see what a Pat Williams did last year. Didn't have to do too much. The Bulls let him develop at his own sort of pace, and he was able to show flashes. And I expect him to have a really big second year. And I think you can sort of expect the same thing out of Scotty Barnes. Did you want to touch on Golden State? Because they were, while they did a few things in free agency, they were a lot less active.
Right.
And I think the main part of their offseason came in that draft period.
That's right. Well, they had 2 important picks, the number 7 and the 14. So a lot of people, even from well before the draft, were talking about how can they package that potentially with Wiseman or with Wiggins to go out there and make a big trade. And they didn't go out there and do that. They did the smart thing. They did basically what you're supposed to do in the draft, which is take the best available player. And a lot of people were thinking they might pass on Kuminga at number 7 because Kuminga was a player who, had top 3 upside in this draft throughout the last 12 months. He was pretty insane, some of his highlights in the G League, and athletically, he's an absolute beast. So a bit of a raw talent, but you couldn't really pass on him given just how talented he could be in his upside. When you get to pick number 7, you basically got to take him. And regardless of fit, the Warriors, I think, made a really smart move there at number 7 just to take him. The longer separated you are from that pick, you realize that you've got an insane asset here and potentially a real game changer for lots of different teams. So at least to have it on your roster is a good thing. And then they went out and got a player who's proven at scoring the ball in Moses Moody. Even though he's a young guy, he definitely showed in college that he was one of the best scorers and a prospect that lots of people were looking at in the first round. And I think he's a guy who can potentially help them right now. He's a guy who can score, a guy who can shoot from the outside, and playing off of hopefully a healthy backcourt of Curry and Klay Thompson. You're definitely going to be getting some really good looks. We saw the quality of looks players like Jordan Poole got in lots of games last season. And I think Moody could step in and do that role. In terms of Kuminga, he's at what you could potentially see as his best. He could be an insane rebounder and defender at the 4 position, which could really help Golden State. You're not sure whether he can, realize that potential straight away, given how quickly the Warriors want to get back into contention. But there is definitely a position in their lineup for him to have a go and potentially crack some time. And if he can get some confidence within the coach, Steve Kerr, then he can potentially have a role with this team as well. And there's always in the back of your mind, what could they do with those 2 picks if they do start playing well, and then midway through the season potentially get a trade working that way. I just think with these 2 picks that the Warriors make, that it kind of puts pressure on last year's draft pick in Jordan Poole, 2 years ago for Poole and last year for Nico Mannion. They're both showing improvement, and it's now a chance for them to step up because they're going to be a little bit older than these 2 young guys coming in, and they're going to have to, really play well to secure more minutes on their roster. So I think the Warriors will be hoping that those 2 can contribute in a more sustainable basis. And then the big question for the Warriors lineup wise with these 2 draft picks is kind of, where does Kelly Oubre fit in? And is he a guy who is still part of this growth and part of this new look Warriors team? And for me, a really important free agency pickup for them, which was really kind of out of left field, was they were able to get Otto Porter Jr. to come over and join this team on a vet minimum, a guy who was coming off, like almost $100 million deal in Washington previously. So they also got Bielitsa, who we both like. I reckon he can help them a little bit. And Jordan Bell returns to that team. So overall, the Warriors have kind of been able to scrape some nice players off, or some decent players off, on vet minimums and small contracts. And then they're going to hold on, at least for the short term, hold on to these 2 draft picks and assets that could really be useful and valuable across the league.
Yeah, so look, Golden State, super interesting team, as you said, though. It was always going to be a matter of what do they do with that 7 and 14, and I'm almost certain that they would have looked to move it to try and get Brad Beal if he had declared that, he wanted out. I thought everyone, and we'll get into it, obviously, having to speak about the Lakers, everyone thought that the Russ trade was, the first of a domino effect that was going to lead to basically the Wizards blowing it up. So obviously surprising that that hasn't come, but who's to say it won't come, during the season, if Beal sort of, watches the first month and can kind of already, the writing's on the wall and he can see that this isn't heading in a direction that he likes, then maybe he asks for, a trade in December. So obviously something down the line that while Golden State obviously know that the pick 7 and 14 are more valuable before you make him than after, at least they are still probably a primary option for a Wizards team that would look to definitely take the rebuild route should they get rid of Beal and, Kuminga, Moody, Wiggins, potentially another draft pick in the future. It's not the worst to start, building around immediately and getting going themselves. So I definitely think down the line, they've set themselves up. You see, trades happen in season more often than not. I think, Golden State probably did the best that they could, given that there wasn't really a guy out there that, was willing to, say, I want out. So, no queries with the Golden State side of things. Obviously excited to see, how they really go this year. And I think the key takeaway there is I honestly don't expect to see too much of Kuminga. I think, obviously, with Clay back, if they weren't already in a win now mode last year, we might get to see a bit of Kuminga at the start of the season, similar to how we saw Wiseman play a lot early in the season. And then as, things started going, it came pretty clear that, we couldn't play Wiseman. And I think it's going to be the case with Kuminga this year. So might see a bit of him early, but then obviously when it comes to, important stretches, we won't expect to see much of him. And still a bit of development left. But overall, don't mind what Golden State did. They basically, with the hand they were dealt, they did the best they could. So interesting to see them and a few other teams with Summer League kicking off this weekend.
Yeah, we've got to be realistic about these guys and how young they're coming in. They're coming in because they're the next potentially best guys to enter the NBA, but they're not entering the NBA as finished products at all. And we're talking about teams that are really contending in championships. A lot of these players are going to be at least a couple of years away from really reaching any kind of that peak talent that they could be.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so that's obviously the draft. Could have gone into more depth about it, but obviously there's more pressing topics that we can hit on that will definitely interest the listeners and are a lot more relevant at the moment. So before we kick into free agency, that's obviously been a lot of the talk over the past 24 hours. And there's still some guys that aren't signed currently. So we probably expect more deals to go down over the next day or two. And, further into, well, I think guys can officially sign on the 6th of August, 7th of August, when the new season, the moratorium kicks off. But obviously a lot of deals were announced yesterday when free agency opened, but they can't actually do pen to paper until, the 6th of August. So there's still obviously a few guys to be picked up. One name I think of, Darcy, is a guy like Reggie Jackson, Dennis Schroeder. So still some names out there that are yet to find a home for this upcoming season. But before we speak about some of the teams that we found had the most interesting start to free agency and that'll have the most sort of impact on the season, got to start with what's close to home, Darcy, and that's a Dallas and Philly check-in. Dallas had an interesting free agency as well as made a nice little trade just before, free agency kicked off. Did you want to speak about your boys before we quickly touch on some Philly and then get into the other teams?
For sure. So that trade that went down, talk about Josh Richardson, definitely a failed trade with you guys, Philly. You guys got the better of us. We'd love to still have Seth Curry on the books, but we move on from Josh Richardson, and the suitor that wanted him is Boston. So Boston have been able to acquire Josh Richardson in a 3-team trade. We end up getting Moses Brown, who's a raw young athletic center, big rebounder from OKC most previously. So, I moved there to get off of Richardson. He's an expiring deal at the end of next year, which could be valuable for Boston. But in terms of the Mavericks, we're kind of just making space, and that basically is a failed experiment, a trade that didn't work out. And it's been unfortunate from that perspective, but we turned that money into Sterling Brown, who actually is an interesting little player who had a bit of a role with Milwaukee. And then I'm sure probably no one watched him play at Houston at the end of last year, but he shot the ball pretty well, played some good minutes. He could be an interesting rotation piece on the bench for us. Obviously, the biggest part of the offseason for us is re-signing Tim Hardaway Jr., and we're able to do that with our we opened up some nice cap space to sign him to a 4-year deal, which is very encouraging. He's a key part of what we're doing. Great sidekick with Luka Doncic, had a career year last year, and he's as good catcher shooting the ball and moving without the ball and knocking down shots as anyone in the league. So very excited to have Tim Hardaway back. He's a big part of this team. We also get to re-sign Boban, which is great for the fans out there, and good for our front court depth. Actually did some interesting things in the playoffs for us, really helped us in some short stretches, really did some good things. You can't replace a 7'2" guy like that. And probably the big signing for us is Reggie Bullock, a 3-year deal, close to a little bit over $10 million a year for Reggie Bullock. I've never been a huge Reggie Bullock fan. I didn't mind him coming out of college. Obviously, he could shoot the ball and looks like he knows what he's doing. But to be fair, you got to give him some credit. He had definitely the season of his career last year with the Knicks. He really locked in that 3-and-D role for them. The Knicks had a really good defense, and he tried his heart out guarding some of the best guys in the league, which is pretty interesting. And the way that he was able to, shoot the ball from deep and at times look really deadly and hit 3 or 4 in a row, I think it's a really nice fit. I'm not sure if this, how much can he play? Can he really be a 30 minutes a game guy starter for us as we go deep into the Western Conference playoffs? But I think in terms of fit and the way that he shoots the ball, and I suppose where he's at in his career, he's looking as good for the taking as possible. So I didn't mind the signing. I thought Reggie Bullock was a pretty solid fit for us.
Yeah, that's my takeaway. I love that. Ultimately, I sort of knew that anyway. The Richardson deal, I wasn't sure it needed to be done, but I wasn't sure if it was a prelude to what potentially they'd be looking to bring in free agency. There was talks that obviously you guys were looking at Lowry, as were a lot of other teams. And obviously once he came off the board, you guys were then obviously had to pivot. And I think a great outcome is still getting Reggie Bullock and getting some wing depth there, as you said, with Sterling Brown. And I really like Reggie Bullock. I think he's a guy that knows sort of his role on offense, and he won't go above and beyond. If you look back at that Knicks team, and especially how they went in the playoffs, it was like, Jesus, they literally have nothing going for them on offense. And it's for Reggie Bullock to still shoot the ball that well, when it's not like, the Knicks had a guy other than Randall that was drawing so much attention that, he was able to just sit in the corner and have open threes all day. And now he's joining a Mavs team that, already have Luka, and he's the ultimate, what's draw card, I should say. So he's just going to get so much attention, and that'll leave a guy like Reggie Bullock so wide open, he probably won't know what to do with himself. And there's who was the other guy that didn't come back? Obviously, JJ Redick didn't come back. He's still a guy that's unsigned. So I think there's, with you guys looking to make the deal for him, obviously at the deadline last year, there's obviously one less shooter on the roster. I know he probably didn't contribute as much as he wanted to, but I think it seemed like from a couple of your moves, with obviously you needed to bring back Hardaway, but as well as getting Sterling Brown. And obviously with the Bullock, shooting was a bit of a priority, because it's definitely something that Richardson couldn't really give you guys.
I think we feel confident that he's ready to go now and ready to contribute in that way, and potentially be a starter, and definitely put some points on the board for us. I think he's ready.
Yeah. Okay. So Philly, look, I can quickly talk about our draft pick, because that makes me a little bit more positive and upbeat about things. 28th, we obviously previewed the draft, and I potentially thought Philly would look to move the deal, move the pick for a deal. We end up taking Jaden Springer, who's a 6'4" guard. He played in Tennessee for college, but he's also out of IMG Academy in Florida there, and a few noted players obviously come from there. Lakers, was it Lakers pick? Portland pick, sorry. Anthony Simons is probably the most famous one as of late. But I think Jaden Springer comes in I should go back to, with IMG, they would regularly, being a team that was based in Florida, play Montverde. And we know Montverde is normally stacked with all types of prospects. They obviously had Cade Cunningham season before last, before he came into college. Obviously had Ben Simmons, D'Angelo Russell. They obviously had a lot of guys that have been on that team throughout the years and have gone through that high school route. So Jaden obviously got a lot of exposure to playing against Cade. He did defend him and match up against him quite a few times. I think Jaden Springer comes in as a defense first type guard. He is a strong build. He doesn't have amazing length, but I kind of almost compare him to almost like Kyle Lowry in the way he's a bit nuggety, and he's going to try and get physical with you as much as possible. He does need to develop a little bit more of a consistent jump shot, which does worry me in the respect that, if you're going to play around Embiid, we ideally need shooting with the attention he gets down low. So something that I wonder if he can develop. Interesting to note, his trainer is Keith Williams, who was the same trainer of Markelle Fultz when Fultz joined Philly, and obviously forgot how to shoot or had his shoulder injury or whatever it was. So look, a little bit worrying, but I'm told by my Philly guys, shout out Jordan Toledis and Nick Kelland and a few of the other boys that are obviously diehard Philly fans, that this book called Tanking to the Top, to not get too off track, reveals that which tanking to the top is basically a start to finish of the process in Philly. And it goes through all the behind the scenes and in depth. And it's a really good book. I think I actually should make sure I read it. But that reveals that it was more Fultz. I don't think Keith Williams is to actually blame for that going wrong and the jump shot going wrong. So interesting there. But I think it just comes back to, hopefully Jaden Springer can come in and just be active and give us minutes, because I expect Maxey to take another step. And obviously Maxey, you think more as an offense scoring type guard. So the fact that we kind of went with a little bit of defense, I wonder how he fits. And I'm sure that with Doc being very similar to a guy like Rick Carlisle that you've experienced, you're not going to see a lot of minutes to rookies. They're going to go with proven guys. And I think Jaden Springer can make his name by, coming in and playing really tough defense. And then obviously if he can shoot 35% from three, I'd probably take that as for his rookie year. And interesting to see how he goes. But that was sort of the first thing for Philly, a main pick. Had a couple second rounders, took a couple of big men, not really sure what to expect of them. And then free agency. So we did have some areas that I thought needed to be addressed. We still haven't re-signed Danny Green, which is interesting. I know he's also got some suitors there that he can potentially go to. So watch out for that over the next couple of days. But the guys we did sign, Andre Drummond, I have no idea why we would do that.
Replacing Dwight, mate.
But Dwight was unplayable in the playoffs. Dust. We couldn't play him against Atlanta. He could barely play 10 minutes a game. So I thought that the way we needed to move forward was getting a backup five that could stretch the floor and actually shoot the three. And I was really hoping we could go for a guy like Olynyk, but he gets a good offer from Detroit, and there's no way we can match that. And I thought potentially, as I mentioned in the preview pod to the draft, we could try and trade for a guy like Larry Nance, and we weren't able to do that. So, or we didn't try. Either way, we didn't have them. And then the other news of a guy we signed, Niang, who most recently was with Utah. Not sure about that. I get that he's probably going to be the backup power forward, but I don't think he's that good defensively. And he was really just a product of knocking down a lot of threes, thanks to the attention that, Joe Ingles would get off a pick and roll and able to hit the corner shooter, or Donovan Mitchell or Mike Conley were able to, find him for a lot of open shots. So I don't really like the fit. I don't like either of the moves we made. I hate Andre Drummond. I think he's going to be unplayable like Dwight. He might help us a little bit more during the regular season, but I don't like it. We re-signed Furkan Korkmaz for, 3 years, 15, which is fine. I'm happy to pay $5 million a year for a guy like that. Yeah. He was a pretty consistent shooter. Hopefully he's still young, 23, 24. Hopefully he can develop a little bit more. And given the money we seen thrown around with some of the other shooters in the past 2 years, whether it be a Harris or a Bertans or even Duncan Robinson this offseason, I'm pretty happy to only pay $5 million. And look, I've mentioned to you pre-pod, praying to God that with all these moves being a little bit weird other than the Furkan one, praying to God that Daryl has something cooking. He has something in the kitchen because these don't make sense. We're going to get into it. You're going to cover a couple of teams from the East. It seems like all the teams around Philly, not necessarily in the same conference, but just in the league, a lot of contenders made some moves to get even better. And it seems like Philly is still in the same position and potentially even a little bit worse, given that Ben Simmons isn't even a confident offensive basketball player at the moment. So I'm really hopeful that something's going to happen before the season, and it can start to make more sense as to why we weren't more active in this free agency period. But yeah, overall, I've just got to trust in Daryl. That's all I can do.
I think if there's one positive, you can look at those players that you've got. They're all on valuable contracts. I think they're actually can definitely outperform what you paid for them. A guy like Drummond, and rewind literally 18 months. This guy's an all-star, averaging 20 points and 18 rebounds. So you basically got him for nothing. So he's potentially a part of a trade, and other teams would be thinking they could get Drummond and potentially could help them as a starter, and he's basically costing them nothing. So it becomes an interesting piece for them to potentially make a move down the line. Philly, obviously, you need to add some size behind Embiid. Embiid's injured for one game. You need someone who can actually play center, and he's your guy, Drummond. Korkmaz, you're right. I think it's a perfect deal. I think I don't like Drummond either. Personally.
I don't like Drummond.
He's his whole attitude and what he brings to the locker room. It's if you're behind Dwight Howard, if Dwight Howard's looking good compared to you, then you're really struggling. But it's not the end of the world. It's a 1-year deal, so we're not talking about you're not locked into anything long term with Drummond. He's not going to be a massive part of what you're doing. Yep. Korkmaz, that's a good signing for sure. I think he showed some nice things defensively as well. He's got some serious length, and you touched on how young he is. He really is quite young. He's got a lot of international experience as well. So Korkmaz, you're right, at that value, he gave them some really good minutes last year, and I think that's a good signing. George Hill out the door. They're not going to re-sign him. Yep. So I think Maxey has earned the minutes there at backup point guard. He showed some really good things. I reckon he could be really positive as a scorer for them, being that backup guy. I think he's ready for a big role, and he's earned that. There's definitely something coming. There is, for sure, whether it's right now or whether it's midway through the year, because you guys could be rolling along in the middle of the Eastern Conference as long as you're winning games. And I feel like with the team you've got, especially if you can bring Danny Green back, you'll still be right up there in the standings of the Eastern Conference. And the closer and closer we get through the season, more moves become available. I think Morey is taking what they can get at good value and waiting for something good to happen or waiting for the right time to strike. And it can be really frustrating as a fan looking at that and seeing what happens. But at the end of the day, right now, you're still in a good position. You're going to be a winning team in the Eastern Conference. And if there's a move to be made, you guys will be right there. And with these small little moves that you've made, you're flexible enough to potentially make a move. And you're right that it all kind of hinges on what's happening with Simmons and how can he come back and how will the team's morale be at the start of next season. But we've still got a while to go before that. So I think stay strong and something will happen eventually for Philly.
I appreciate that. Definitely made me feel a little bit better about how the team's situated. So thank you for that, Das. So now, obviously free agency as a whole, a lot has gone down. This is obviously the main talking point that we wanted to really get through with today's pod. You are going to speak about a couple of teams from the East, and I was going to take a couple of teams from the West. Did you want to start with your first team from the East, and then I'll tackle first team from the West, and we can just go tic-tac?
Sure. I think the blockbuster move in the Eastern Conference was Kyle Lowry is now on the Miami Heat. So championship winner with Toronto now moves over to Miami on a 3-year, $90 million. So he's taken a 3-year deal, $30 million a season. And in that trade, going to Toronto is Goran Dragic and Precious Achiuwa, who Miami really liked and a lot of people thought was a good value pick, but he's now on the way to Toronto. So Miami, to kind of supplement what they made with that trade, so they bring in Kyle Lowry on the point. They've extended Jimmy Butler. So we knew that this was coming in a 4 years, $184 million deal to be the number one option, to be the man. And they've extended Duncan Robinson. So you touched on just how expensive, valuable shooters are. And Duncan Robinson, he's not just a shooter. He's shooting threes at an incredibly high percentage that is only the amount of makes that he's getting are only rivaled by the likes of Curry, Thompson, and a guy like Buddy Hield. So he is the highest range of shooter, and what it's costing you at this rate in the NBA is 5 years, $90 million. So that's an expensive deal for a guy who potentially gets hunted on defense, but obviously a very key part of what Miami are doing. They also re-signed Gabe Vincent, a guy that we like. He could be a role player for them off the bench, and Dwayne Dedman, who got a run for them end of last year. He's going to be their backup center. The big signing that they made to potentially round out their starting lineup is PJ Tucker. So I don't know about you. I felt pretty confident that Tucker might have returned to Milwaukee given the success they had last year, obviously winning the championship and the key role that he played. But it might have been a money thing because he's getting $15 million now for 2 seasons to go play for Miami. And I also really like that fit. They might not have as great a chance to win the championship given just how strong Milwaukee are now and how confident they are. But he's going to a really great situation here in Miami. They also signed Markieff Morris to kind of round out their bench and give them a little more scoring punch. So when you look at Miami and this deal that they made, their starting lineup looks like Kyle Lowry with Duncan Robinson and Jimmy Butler. And then their front court now with Tucker more than likely being their starting small ball 4, and then Bam Adebayo in the 5 spot. So that is a pretty nice starting lineup, particularly defensively. This team just got really, really tough. We already knew that they're a tough team with the run that they made in the bubble, but it's going to be really difficult to score on these guys. And they're definitely really buying in and honing in on that kind of scrappy style. I know that we saw a lot of games last year. They're a team who had teams in the 80s and the 90s. Basically every game in Miami was an absolute slogfest. And they're basically buying right into that. And it's going to really define kind of their style of play and allows Hero to become that bona fide 6-man off the bench. And I think probably the only thing that I guess highlights itself right now is how are they going to score, and when it comes down to it in the playoffs, which this team looks destined to be in a good position in the Eastern Conference in terms of where they finish, who's going to be their guy, who's going to put the ball in the basket for them in the clutch moments, because it looks like they've pretty much sorted it all out defensively. They probably need another backup rim protector. Obviously, Dwayne Dedman's who they've got right now, but they could probably improve that position. But offensively, what are they going to go to? I reckon a big question for me with this Lowry move is, can Jimmy Butler be a number one option scoring? Because he's not going to have to do as much facilitating now. He's not going to have to do as much rebounding. And Lowry, is an exceptional defender, can even guard taller guys. He needs to average closer to 27 to 30 points a game. He's a guy who really did it all, but only averaged 20 a game last year, obviously on good shooting. And you might have to sacrifice some shooting percentage, but he's definitely going to have to shoot more threes and expand his game a little bit offensively. when you're paying this guy 187 million, he's really going to have to evolve his game to become more of a scorer rather than a facilitator and defender, I think, for Jimmy Butler. For them to be that championship contender, that's the key. And another thing that really stands out with their roster now is just they need some scoring off the bench. You know, that starting lineup looks good, but they really need someone to, you know, when you've got Lowry here for 3 years and you've got Butler here for 4 years, they just need to fit those pieces around in the bench and those other, you know, complementary pieces to push this team into real championship contention. Do you think they could be a contender next year to win the East?
Yeah, with the re-signing of Max Strus, yeah, they're going to be elite, boss. No, I think they're going to be a top three. I think they've pushed themselves into that definitely top four of the East, but I think they're definitely the team you'd probably have to think of now without obviously seeing them on the floor as that next best option to take out the East behind a Brooklyn and Milwaukee. Unless you have another team that you think pushes up ahead, I would say that just looking at them now, they would probably be the third best team in the East. And I think you make a really good point about them sort of doubling down on that defensive gritty identity. And it's really interesting how they had to deal with that last year, because obviously that was an effective way for them to win some games. But they needed to then really give up anything good defensively to obviously have their best offensive lineup. And that was when you had,
That's
Dragic,
right.
Hero, Robinson, and then you were just kind of like, yikes, our backcourt's going to get destroyed. So they obviously don't have to do that now with Lowry being able to be out there. Obviously, he's a big defensive upgrade over Dragic. But I think it kind of goes without saying, you're going to need the best version of Kyle Lowry if Miami's going to,
that's right,
be a real threat in the postseason this year. And I agree with you. I think there's still a couple moves that they can potentially make. And, they could be a guy that could hopefully pick up maybe a Reggie Jackson on a cheaper type deal, and he could come to town as just another guy that can come in off the bench and just score and give him that offensive spark and a boost. And because look, I know it's probably harsh to say that Tyler Hero is poor offensively. He's definitely had a poor year. But from what we saw in his rookie year, even before, the bubble, he was so confident, and everything about him, the swagger and obviously the irrational confidence is kind of what you love. And he just wasn't afraid. And it seemed as though, he just didn't have that same intensity. I even remember from last year, or the year before, sorry, his rookie year. I don't know if you remember the game. Philly were in Miami, and we sort of had a lead that almost felt like we were going to close out the game. And Embiid had the ball near halfway, and he was holding onto it, and someone poked it out of, and Tyler Hero immediately just pulled up for three to give Miami the lead with about 5 seconds left, and they ended up winning that game. But that reminds you, like, that Tyler Hero, why can't he come back? And, maybe this has been a big off season for him to try and get back to, trajecting upwards with his performance and being a real positive when he's on the floor. But yeah, I really like what Miami did. You summed it up nicely. I think quite confusing that Milwaukee don't bring back him, but they bring back Bobby Portis. And look, if it's at the sake of 15 million, which is what you said, I think the deal was for PJ Tucker. I mean, if you're Milwaukee, you're a championship team. Like, what are we doing here? Of course, you're going to go into potentially paying, a little bit more in tax to bring back a guy like PJ Tucker that was a key part of your rotation and someone who you really needed to guard KD. And they're gonna feel his void this year, or if they have to face off against Brooklyn again. They're gonna really feel it. Did they sign someone else to replace? Did they sign someone else to replace PJ?
Bucks?
Sorry, before you. I can't think of if they signed any.
The Bucks got Rodney Hood, so a guy who's lost a lot of his value and had a lot of injuries, and is a good offensive player. Not a different kind of player.
Not a like for like or a defensive guy, though. Hey, no.
But a lot of people could argue just how valuable is Tucker, because he tried extremely hard and did some really good things on the boards, and obviously did a lot for them. I think he did a lot for them emotionally to get them through. All right, let's take up this challenge to guard these amazing players and just keep fighting and fighting. I suppose that was probably his greatest asset, because you look around and the guys he was guarding were going off for 30 a game on like 50% shooting. Durant averaged like 45 a game in that series, something ridiculous. So his role he's not the only guy in the world that can play that role. Obviously, did a great job of it last season, though, so credit to him. But the Bucks obviously felt like there is some way that they could replace what he did with someone else out there on the market.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, and it's not just his defense. PJ Tucker, how many offensive rebounds did he get in the NBA Finals to really help his team?
They might have won the series earlier if he knocked down a few threes, because he went so bloody cold in the playoffs. I think he hit 19 threes, and for the whole playoffs, considering he was playing like 35 minutes a game, he didn't give them much on the offensive end in terms of scoring. So maybe the Bucks are thinking they could add someone who can shoot the ball.
Yeah, I understand your perspective, but I just think if you won the championship, surely you run it back just at least 1 year. I don't know. I don't care if it's due to luck or injuries. Like you run it back.
Don't tell that to me. 2011 Mavs, we basically busted the whole team up. So
That's right. That's right. You let Tyson Chandler go to New York, and then you had to trade back for him. I remember that. Yeah. I don't know. Sometimes it's just not overthinking things, but interesting. That, I think, especially when it's not like PJ Tucker got a 3-year, $60 million deal from someone. It's like, it's only 2 years, 15. Like, you can't pay 7.5 a season to bring him back.
I think the Bucks are realistic that they're not the favorites, despite, they're definitely one of the favorites in the East, but to say that they're more talented than Brooklyn at full strength is a bit of a stretch. So there's definitely more work for the Bucks to be done than just, replacing PJ Tucker.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Good point. All right. So I'll kick things off from the West side of things, Das, with the Lakers. It makes obviously most sense. So active with everything they did, obviously in the lead up to the draft. And it makes sense to speak about the main deal that went down. And that was obviously acquiring Westbrook. Before getting into sort of any of their free agency moves and how they sort of look as a roster now, what do you personally think of that Westbrook fit? Because for me, I don't hate it. I don't love it. I'm so fascinated to see how it'll work out. I don't think you're a fortune teller if you know otherwise, in my opinion. I don't think it's very easy to determine how it'll look, but I'm just super fascinated as a fan.
It's unbelievable how Westbrook has left OKC and then just become part of the turning NBA wheel. His contract has just moved to so many teams and become, so up and down in value. But the reality is that he's a superstar talent, and there's no doubt that he's going to change the game for LA completely. Whether it's going to turn out in a championship or whether it's all going to work, whether it's going to be clunky, whether, him and LeBron are going to butt heads, it's all remains to be seen. And you're right, it's absolutely fascinating. But I think it's a great move for them, and it's a great move for the NBA because, we're now talking about the Lakers as contenders again when it felt like they went quietly into the night after losing to Phoenix in the playoffs. Now they're right back in the head of the conversation. They're a team that other teams are going to have to get through to make it to the championship. And, Russell Westbrook, he's probably the most interesting thing that I heard about this situation is that when Paul George ended up coming to the Clippers when leaving OKC, apparently Westbrook was trying to link up with Kawhi beforehand. So he called up Kawhi and said, let's team up in LA with the Clippers. Obviously, Russell's from LA. It makes sense for him to want to go there, and it makes sense for him to want to play with Kawhi. But then Kawhi gets on the phone and goes, hey, Paul, like, your teammate's probably going to bounce out. What do you reckon about trying to work a trade to come over here? And a lot of ways that probably put a pretty sour taste in Westbrook's mouth about Paul George and Kawhi. And obviously they had a lot of success this season, the Clippers, but with the injury to Kawhi, they're extremely vulnerable, the Clippers. And for Westbrook to get his way over to LA to team up with LeBron and AD, he's put himself in a pretty gun position to potentially be a champion.
Yeah, look, I think off the bat, that's obviously really fascinating that he tried to do that. I don't necessarily think just after hearing that would be he's trying to go behind Paul George's back. I just think he just probably thought, I want to get home to LA. And, he obviously knew Kawhi was looking at all his options, after his championship run there in Toronto. So obviously that's an interesting tidbit.
Kawhi himself also, LeBron probably genuinely thought that he was going to come and join AD and him in that offseason as well. And he's gone, I want to do it my way. LA want to do it our way. The Lakers have just shown why they're the Lakers and the mystique around them. And there's no player that's ungettable for the likes of the Los Angeles Lakers. They want that 18th championship. They want to surpass the Celtics.
Yeah, 100%. So, look, obviously the Westbrook fit, we've just sort of spoken about it, but he helps them in the regular season. That's obviously something off the bat because, we've seen if just from the past season here in Washington, just the level he went to after the All-Star break. Obviously a triple-double every night. And while we can speak about that, he's a stats first kind of guy, the Wizards were still winning games and it was off his bat. He was doing it all. So, and you'll even remember he beat the Wizards, or the Wizards beat the Lakers twice. They beat him in overtime in LA, and then they came to Washington, and this was with still LeBron, I think, and AD, and they were able to beat him twice. So Westbrook
they beat Brooklyn too.
Yep, exactly. So there's definitely enough sample to be able to say that Russ will be a massive contributor to the regular season. And it's the postseason for me where you can start really focusing on the questions, because if you look at a team spearheaded by AD and LeBron, the main thing you want around them is shooting and defense. And safe to say that that's not Russ's strength. And he hasn't proven to be a guy who can consistently do both those two things. He can definitely shoot it, but can he shoot it well? He takes a lot of shots. He's a high volume guy.
He can finish in transition, and he can play make. That's the two major things that they're going to bring. If he can, you talk about the flaws in Westbrook's game that's held him back in, potentially advancing in the playoffs. It's got to be a pretty nice pressure release. He's been playing with some superstars, but he's never played with a superstar like LeBron, who can single-handedly win you a game at any time.
True.
And if Anthony Davis is fit and playing like he was in the bubble, then that lineup is deadly. He doesn't have to do as much, and obviously if they all buy in defensively, we're talking about a juggernaut defensively, 3 superstar players in their prime. Basically, it's pretty scary to think about it like that. Obviously the offensive challenges with Westbrook, he's going to have to hit open shots. You wonder if his 3-point percentage could go any further down. It just seems like he's dropping down lower into the 30s, and his free throw percentage is at like 55. And it's like, what's going on, Russ? But, it's a new opportunity, new chance to play with the stud. And the biggest part for him is, at least for the Lakers, he's going to be their point guard. He's going to average 11 assists a game at least. He's going to be making so many plays for teams just by driving the ball down, getting downhill, kicking out to shooters. That's his bread and butter. And, the Lakers have just added that to their mix.
Yeah. So that was obviously their headline move that they made. But then also, I should probably say, most people know, but they obviously gave up KCP, Kuzma, and Harrell. And I think it was a 22nd pick in the draft that just went. So they obviously had some roster spots that they needed to fill as a result of doing a 3-for-1 trade effectively. So
not a lot of money to fit it though.
No, not a lot of money to fit. So they obviously went pretty ham over the last 24, 48 hours that we've just spoken about. So I think I have the names all covered, Das, but if I'm wrong, feel free to jump in and add in or correct. So Carmelo, Ariza, Dwight Howard, Ellington, Bazemore, Malik Monk, and Kendrick Nunn, I think were the 7 additions they've made so far.
Wow. Mm-hmm. I think you're exactly right.
That's obviously really interesting because given a couple of the guys they already have on their roster, and one of them is in the Olympics at the moment, that's Marc Gasol. They have 5 guys on their roster that are 35 years or older. So look, obviously it goes without saying all of these moves, they're going to be in a prime seat to, win another championship. But I think expect a lot of guys to rest during the regular season from that list of 35-year-olds. And you're going to be seeing quite a lot of, a Malik Monk and a Kendrick Nunn and a Westbrook and, a lot of these guys. You will see a lot of Dwight, because I just think the Lakers will have learnt from last year. And as weird as it was, I'm sure that, even a AD that's 70% healthy and a LeBron that's, whatever, 60, 70% healthy as well is probably getting past Phoenix. But the fact of the matter is that AD just couldn't even run up the floor. And LeBron was obviously, battling his ankle injury that he did earlier in the season. I think it was against Atlanta. So I think they're going to actually prioritize health and rest. And I know we expected that coming into this season. I was very surprised because LeBron wanted to play every game and flex his muscles and say, I'm still here and I'm the man. And wanted to really go for that MVP. And given how he started, he was in with a good shot at really taking out that MVP before he got injured. So I think expect a lot of guys to rest, expect some of those signings that they made to be key prominent parts of their rotation for that regular season. If there was one area of concern last year, you look at the shooting, but it seems like they've certainly addressed that with some of the snipers, Ellington, Monk, a couple of guys that you think of straight away. But if you add in Ariza and Bazemore to Ellington and Malik Monk, those four combined to shoot 40% from deep last season. So definitely have improved in that area, which is obviously what you need. I think LeBron will be primed as ever to look around him and go, okay, we've got the troops here. This is a year where I can literally go all in, especially come playoff time. You can see, Zero Dark 30 mode activated where he's off social media and, he's just all focused on that championship like he does some of those years. And I think this year you could really expect LeBron to go, berserker mode to really lift the team, because it seems as though he's got the group around him. I think there's going to be potential that, Russ, you're going to get the best version of him and he's going to be motivated and really buy in. And so I'd expect LeBron to look around him and go, it's now. I'm really going all in this year. And I'm really hopeful. It's looking way too far ahead, but everyone wants the Brooklyn Lakers NBA Finals with both sides fully healthy. And, really hope we get that if those two teams are to meet, and it is destiny. But yeah, that should be awesome. But I think you're going to get the best version of LeBron this season is what I come back to.
For sure. Well, you look back at how impressed we were with the Lakers off-season last year, coming into this season, getting some nice pickups like Harrell and Marc Gasol to boost their front court. I think some of these pickups that they've made right now almost look superior and they make more sense. Obviously, they've been able to add Russell Westbrook as well, which, it just seems like they're adding layers to what they've got with LeBron and AD. And it's a lot of talent here. Some of these players that you talked about there, they're on kind of the back end of their career a little bit. When you talk about guys like Ariza and Bazemore, Ariza was not so good last year with Miami, but you might be able to squeeze a tiny bit out of him. Bazemore shot the three ball as good as he ever has with Golden State, had a bit of a career revival. And I like some of the young guys that they picked up. You talk about Monk. I thought Monk was a hot guy who teams really wanted to get after as a bench scorer, because he showed some real flashes in Charlotte. And if he's healthy, I like him in that lineup with LeBron and AD and Westbrook and getting open and being athletic. I think that's a really nice pickup. They retained your boy, Talen Horton-Tucker. So
I forgot to mention that. Yeah.
He probably becomes that de facto backup point guard, and there's definitely a bigger role for him next year, especially if they're going to pay him a little bit of money. So
yeah,
and you and I both like Wellington. I think he can definitely shoot the ball, and he's shooting it as good as anyone in the league quietly for Detroit. He's putting up 9 threes a game and almost hitting 5. So he's seriously a good shooter and a guy who LeBron is the type of guy who LeBron completely can unlock. So you're right. I think LeBron is be rejuvenated with this roster that they've got right now, and there will be some moving parts before they get to the season. But no doubt they're on the start of a mission back to the promised land, LA, I think. And
look, it's sort of it's probably a dumb question, but I should say it. Given Denver's situation, given the Clippers with their main guy, no Kawhi, he's definitely ruled out for all this season. Obviously, I think so, right? Yeah. There's no way he comes back in the playoffs or something. Maybe he could, but it's a stretch to ask for him to come back and perform at the level he is. So you can probably rule out the Clippers as being a real contender, and then Denver, unless Murray comes back in March of next year and he's just ready to go. So it probably makes the Lakers as the team you'd expect to come out of the West, right? We're not thinking of, there's no way Golden State could come in and look, the way Golden State's currently built now, it's hard to see it unless Clay comes back and is just a monster. But it feels like Golden State's not a finished team anyway. We just spoke about them and how they could potentially make another deal. So I guess the question is, it's Lakers, right? They come out of the West.
Right now, it seems like that for sure. There's still going to be the Dallas and the Utah banging on the door.
I forgot. I didn't mean to disrespect your boys, Das.
But nah, if you're a betting man, this Lakers roster is shaping up to be something special.
Yeah, for sure. Your second team from the East.
Okay, so probably the most active team in free agency so far has been Chicago. So we talked about how big a splash they made at the trade deadline last year, acquiring Vucevic and making some serious tweaks to their lineup. They've done 2 sign-in trades. So the first one they did was Lonzo Ball. So they picked him away from the Pelicans, 4 years, $85 million, which might seem like a lot for Lonzo, but Chicago are willing to take a risk on him, and they traded out Satoransky and Garrett Temple, and also a first-round pick in this sign-and trade to get Lonzo Ball to be their starting point guard for the next 4 years. And they also, a day later, it was announced that they made a move to get DeMar DeRozan, so a guy who has been rumored for well over 12 months and potentially be in deals, but it's just which team could use him and what kind of value could they get for him in a sign and trade. DeMar DeRozan comes to Chicago on a 3-year, $85 million deal, and they send out Thad Young, Al-Farouq Aminu, a first and 2 second-round picks. So I feel like the Spurs have got a really good kind of package of draft picks and a couple of veteran players here for DeRozan. And I think that shows his value because they were never going to sell for less than value. When you look at the numbers that DeRozan's been putting up the last 2 years with the Spurs, it's almost 25 a game on 50% shooting. And I've spoken about it multiple times, how his assist to turnover ratio is getting so much better. And he's now moved to a team that are serious contenders for Eastern Conference spot. They're not that far off, that middle of the pack teams in the Eastern Conference. When you look at what else Chicago have done, they signed the GOAT. They signed Alex Caruso for a 4-year, $37 million deal, which is pretty friendly. And I think Caruso looks like he's ready to have a bigger role in an NBA team. Did some really good things for the Lakers in limited minutes. They trade out Daniel Tice to Houston. I didn't think Tice really made sense on this team either, so I think that makes sense to get him off the roster and make room for DeRozan and Lonzo. When you look at their starting lineup now, Chicago Bulls, they've got Lonzo at the 1, DeRozan, and then Zach LaVine at the 3 spot. And then they've got Markkanen still yet to be re-signed, and Vucevic. And their bench, they got some punch from Kobe White, who they're relying on a lot, and Pat Williams, who we talked about, an interesting young player. So with that starting lineup, they definitely, if they weren't already all in on becoming a playoff team, then they absolutely definitely are now, because they've got an all-star, they've got a number 2 overall draft pick on big money. They've got LaVine, who's an all-star and a superstar right now, and Vucevic has been an all-star center. They've got 3 all-star players right now in their starting lineup. So they definitely made a big improvement to their starting team. And I think they genuinely have enough talent to contend with those teams who are just below championship potential. So I think you get just under Philly, you come to Atlanta, your Boston, New York, and you stretch a little bit further to the Pacers and Charlotte and maybe even the Raptors. I think out of those teams, they're just as talented as any of them. These 3 players in their starting lineup are in the prime of their careers and they're all-star players. So the question really moves not to do they have enough talent to be a playoff team, it's how does the fit work? And for me, with DeRozan's increased efficiency scoring, I think he can slot into pretty much any team. I think everyone feels like we know what his game is. And we talk about how he's a clutch scorer. He's a guy who they will go to down the stretch to get big buckets. They will be 2-point buckets, but they'll go to him for sure. And I think Lonzo has turned himself into a guy who fits well with pretty much everyone, considering how many 3-pointers he was putting up last year, and he showed the ability to splash a bunch in a row and really pick up his percentage. So I think that fit at the point guard is interesting. I don't know if he's, if you like him as a point guard, but
love him.
He definitely can shoot the ball from the outside. And now I think this is a great spot for LaVine because he can be the do-it-all wing, and I think he can do it all. If he can step it up defensively, he showed that he could score 30 points a game almost for the season. So this is a great spot for him. And we both like Vucevic, I think. Probably, when you talk about all those weapons they've got offensively, Vucevic is a strong inside post player. You've got a guy who can get his own shot at any time in DeRozan, and Ball, if he can shoot the 3 ball well, paired with LaVine's athleticism and explosive scoring. This team's got a lot of offensive punch. So I like what Chicago have done. The big question, I think, and the only hole in their team now is defense in the front court. And obviously the big question over what do they do with Markkanen, because that starting 4 spot, they really need some defense and some rebounding maybe it looks more like Pat Williams. Or if you re-sign a guy like Markkinen and you're hoping to stretch the floor, but you're really giving up a lot defensively in terms of covering the rim. So busy, lots of stuff going on for Chicago, but I think they've just made huge acquisitions in talent and given up some draft picks to get them.
Yeah, no, I really like the moves they made. I think to go off what you just spoke about there with Markkinen, I think that they basically told him see what offers you can get. That's why there's been no news about him, re-signing, because he's potentially still trying to see what offers are out there for him on the market. And you could potentially say the same thing about John Collins, who hasn't been signed yet for Atlanta. So a couple of interesting spots there for those two big men in particular. And I would be inclined to think that if Markkinen can get an offer from another team, that Chicago won't be too fast, and more likely than not, they'll encourage it, because I think they would want to try and do a sign and trade, and potentially within that, because obviously you just mentioned it, they did it with Lonzo to try and get back a helpful defensive type big man, that can really slot in there that can help him in those positions of need. I'd be interested to think about what situation a guy like Caruso can come into. Is it even possible that if you really wanted to go small for particular stretches, would you consider putting Vucevic on the bench, Pat Williams at the 5, going crazy? I don't know if that can work. I think what you could have worked is with a guy who they actually had to get rid of to get DeRozan, and that's Thad Young. Thad Young could have played the small ball 5. You could have had Pat Williams in there. You could have also found a way to slot Caruso in there for certain matchups when you need him. But I think just sort of speaking about that aloud, you probably wouldn't be able to get away with that now. You probably couldn't play Pat Williams at the 5. That sounds a bit crazy, but look, overall, I really like the moves that they made. I think my favorite one is Lonzo. I love Lonzo. I'm a big fan of his. Similar to what I was speaking about with Devontae Graham, I'll touch on a little bit more from the Pelican side of things next. But I think Lonzo has turned into, I know he gets a lot of slack and heat, but he's still another guy that's really young, like 23 years old. Still obviously got a lot of growth within him, but he started to develop a really nice game of, he knows he can get his bread and butter in transition, but in the half court, he's obviously really improved his shooting from the perimeter. And that makes him a guy that, almost like you've said with DeRozan, you can fit Lonzo into most situations. He's obviously got the defensive prowess. I think he's 6'6", 6'7". So you obviously don't have much defensively in a guy like DeRozan, just thinking about it off the bat. Look, he could buy in, Levine could buy in, and they could all start playing, incredible defense. But given what we've seen, it hasn't been what they've done in the past. But obviously that doesn't mean they can't do it in the future. So I just think a guy like Lonzo will most likely take, the best perimeter guard on the opposition. And I just think my favorite move from that is his fit. And I think you can go a little bit defensive as well with what I just mentioned with bringing Caruso into the lineup. If you wanted to bring Caruso into the backcourt next to Lonzo, you reunite him from their Lakers days, and, they just try to create havoc and really get up in the opposition's grill and try to get turnovers, get out in transition, use your Levines and your Pat Williams to get some easy buckets and the passing ability of Lonzo. So look, overall, I think they've got kind of the best of both worlds, because you summed it up nicely that at the end of it all, if if the offense breaks down, you can dump it into Vooch to get your bucket down low. You can run a pick and roll. You can give the ball to Levine and let him ISO. You can give the ball to DeRozan and let him ISO in that mid range. So, gosh, they've got a ton of options. And I might even push a little bit further on what you were saying and say they have potential to be in the top 4. If things go right for them and they stay healthy, given their talent and sort of that starting lineup, as you mentioned in particular, I could see them pushing, Atlanta to try and be that team that slots into the 4th seed, or if not the 5th seed.
It feels a lot like Atlanta last year, right? They went out and spent their money and filled that with some veterans who were proven players in Gallinari and in Bogdanovic. So bring in DeRozan and Lonzo to fit with Vooch, who they got just before. Interesting talent. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. There's a lot of upside for them. And there's just no way that this team doesn't at least challenge in the play-in. There's just no way. But with this amount of talent now in this roster, Billy Donovan, I think he knows enough about what he's doing. This team's going to be tough.
Yeah. Did you say play-in or playoffs?
Both. There's no way they're not going to be in that conversation all season. There's no way.
They shouldn't even be in the conversation for playing. They should be a top 6 seed where they don't even have to worry about playing in the play-in, in my opinion anyway. But, we're obviously forgetting about other teams that you've just mentioned, especially Atlanta, who, will take a lot of confidence away from their playoff run. So, plenty of interesting teams beside that top 4.
They landed them, they acquired the draft picks and then got that capital to be able to trade for these guys. So good on them. And can't wait to see, Chicago haven't been relevant for a long time, Jimmy Butler and D Rose basically feels like a long time ago. So happy for them.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so my final team on the West, the Pelicans. Spoke about him a little bit throughout this pod, mentioning that I wanted to get to him. And safe to say I'm pretty disgusted with what they did. I've got no clue. Like, to start off, if you want a bit of revisionist history, so they obviously, before the draft, traded Steven Adams and Bledsoe, had to give up the 10th pick in order to do that. Obviously got back Valanciunas, and while we kind of like that deal for, JV obviously gives his heart every night, but they really, when you look at what they did with that cap space, so they end up moving Lonzo, as you mentioned, in the sign and trade, and they get back Temple, Satoransky in the first. But then they go out and get Devontae Graham in a sign and trade with Charlotte, and they give up a future first round pick to ultimately do that. So if you're just looking at
first round pick, they
gave up Lonzo and they got back Temple, Satoransky, and Graham as just the pieces, not talking about the draft pick, just the guys that will help him this season. Lonzo's 3 years younger than Devontae Graham. He's a better shooter. He's a better passer. He's a better defender.
I'd push back a little bit on the shooting, because I like Devontae Graham. I think he's not the perfect player, but I think he's undervalued a little bit, and his value got knocked a little bit because of how good LaMelo Ball was last year, especially when LaMelo Ball went off through a stretch in the middle of the season. Graham was injured. And before that, and if you look at how good Devontae Graham was the season before, he was debatably should have been the most improved player in the league. He not only did he shoot the ball well off the dribble from 3-point land, he also was in the top 3 guys in the league in potential assists. In the last 2 seasons, he's averaged no less than 6.5 assists. So this guy is a playmaker and a really good kind of tone setter at the point guard position. And although Lonzo has some really nice, aspects to his game, and particularly the defense and his size, Graham is a really smart playmaker, a guy who gets lots of assists and can get you a bucket off the dribble from 3. So although he's not setting the world on fire, Devontae Graham, I think at the price that they got him, it's not too bad. Only $45 million, is it, for 4 years? So I think there's a little bit of value, sneaky value in him for the Pelicans next year. And I'd be interested to see what he can do at the starting spot when you got some talented guys around him like Ingram and Zion, which obviously ultimately determine how this team will go.
Yeah, interesting. You're a Devontae Graham guy. No, I hate that. I mean, just looking at the stats initially, you obviously talk about his breakout year, 18 points on 38% shooting. And then this year he didn't even have too much of a drop off, but 38% down to 37.5%. But Lonzo has still been so consistent in terms of 40% shooter last year and 41% shooter in the season that's just gone by. So I think just the fit in terms of how you're trying. Look, if you're the Pelicans, you come from the perspective of how do we get a better team and make Zion happy? Because I think that's what it comes back to. That's what they got to be most worried about. And if you're Zion, do you look at that and go, I'm happy that we've got Temple, Satoransky, and Graham? It doesn't do much.
The longer that this Lonzo kind of question over where they were going to re-sign him went, we basically should have known that they weren't going to do it, because they would have locked him up so much earlier. Yeah. And it felt like it was inevitable that he was going to go somewhere else. And I suppose the compensation ends up being Graham. But you're right. I think that's a decision that they made earlier, and it will be one that will be criticized if Lonzo turns out to be playing real good and they go down even further next year, the Pelicans. But they they drew a hard line and said, Lonzo's not our guy for close to 100 mil for 4 years. It's not our guy.
And he's a great fit with Zion. He was able to really showcase his ability to find Zion in transition. And again, I thought the shooting worked really well. And so, look, it'll be interesting to see how they kind of move forward with this team. Obviously, they got a new coach, Willie Green. He's obviously a respected guy that we've mentioned, given his playing career and most recently being an assistant with the Suns, and Chris Paul really respecting him as a coach. So I just come back to if the time is ticking on the Zion bomb, and I wonder when he just goes, enough's enough, I want out, because we mentioned it in the past that it could be at Anthony Davis 2.0 if New Orleans don't really figure out the roster around Zion, and it feels like they're heading in the wrong direction.
It's a quick reset button, right? From firing your coach and obviously having a really unhappy locker room to trying to make some quick moves to see how we can improve next year, bring in a new coach, bring in a new philosophy. I'm sure they're going to be, definitely changing the way they play, and hopefully there's an attitude adjustment from Ingram and Zion to, care a little bit more about what's going on. I feel like they were cruising for a lot of last season. But it starts with, the type of players that they bring in and the culture that they've got. I think Satoransky will be a decent backup for them. I like him as a player, and Garrett Temple seems to be a guy who really helps locker rooms. He's a guy who people enjoy being around. They signed the Sydney Kings guy, Didi Lozada, who's now getting his shot in the NBA, the Brazilian. So we'll see if he's up to it. We both like Nickeil Alexander-Walker. He's still an interesting piece. Jackson Hayes, we spoke about when we talked about the Valanciunas trade, he might potentially be ready for a jump. So, they miss out. They pass on Lonzo, but they've still got a lot of talent, and there's still a lot of moves to be made in terms of where they're going and how they're going forward. And you're right that the clock is ticking on what's happening with Zion, but at the end of the day, the NBA has set up this trap that basically if Zion wants to leave, then he's going to leave $50 to $100 million on the table when he's eventually ready for that supermax.
Yep. No, obviously, yeah, that's the main thing there. Money speaks, right? So normally guys are inclined to sign that rookie extension, and then a couple of years into that, they decide if they can continue forward with the team or not, and ask for the trade once they've obviously signed on the dotted line and got their money. So look, yeah, we'll see. Maybe they'll be a bit better this year, a bit more of a team buying in. But I just think from a off-season perspective, I hate what they did. I'm really confused by a lot of it. And even something simple as I really like a guy like Kira Lewis. I think he was good, and he got some minutes last year behind Lonzo, but he didn't get a ton of opportunity. Now they've gone ahead and brought in Graham Satoransky to potentially be ahead of him on that depth chart. So now pushes him back, and that's obviously not great for his development, I would think. So just another thing to sort of note. But yeah, overall, not a big fan of the Pelicans off season. I think that's safe to say. Okay, but obviously there's still plenty more to go down. Obviously, we've seen trades happen before the start of the season, and players come in training camp, they're not happy. And I'd be very curious to know what happens down the line with a guy like Dame. I know Dame has obviously said, and it's also been rumored that he doesn't want to demand a trade while he's still playing for US in Tokyo. So potentially, come closer to the start of the season, he could see that, they haven't really done too much to help him. I know they brought in Cody Zeller, and who else did they bring in? Ben McLemore. But those aren't going to be moving the needle for a guy like Dame, who wants his team to be able to, be in a position to compete. That's what he asked for.
They let Zach Collins go, a guy who they, traded up to get, wasted a draft pick to get, that did not turn out at all.
Yeah, I'd be interested to. Well, I find a couple of the Spurs moves to definitely be interesting and see where they go. Obviously, there was a lot of speak about their draft pick that they made, number 12. I think they took a guy. His name's Josh Primo, who's the youngest guy in the draft. And again, to any listeners who don't know, he's a guard. So immediately when you've already got DeJounte Murray and Derek White in the backcourt, interesting. Maybe they knew a guy like Patty Mills was going to go, DeRozan was going to go, so they thought, let's just take the best available, and maybe in their mind he was the best available. So
it's a complete reset for the Spurs finally. Besides that that tension in the guard spot. Yeah, they've basically got a whole new roster. Looks nothing like the Spurs of old.
Yeah, there's potential they could be one of the poorer teams in the West this upcoming season. So now that the NBA stuff's out of the way, Das, it's obviously the thing that keeps basketball going at the moment for us Aussies with NBA during the day.
Boomers.
It's the Olympics that take care of things in the evenings at the moment with games. So just to sort of quickly summarize and wrap up what happened in the quarterfinals. So Slovenia win by 25, US win by 15, France win by 10, Australia win by 40. So there wasn't too many games in those four that were competitive. Do you have a takeaway or a particular thing you want to speak about from any of those quarterfinal matchups before we start to speak about the semis?
I think the favourites got through, and Spain losing a game to Slovenia and Argentina losing a game to Slovenia. That's what cost them, because now they're coming up against the two top dogs in Australia and USA. So I thought the better teams took care of business. The Aussie win was quite spectacular, the way we destroyed Argentina and really went on with it. A 25-0 run in FIBA basketball is, we completely shut them down defensively and got in a groove offensively, which is exactly where we want to be coming into a big-time semi-final matchup against the US. So that probably stands out the most as an all-round team performance by us. And I thought probably a pretty touching moment where Luis Scola exited the game late for Argentina and got a standing ovation. They kind of all stopped the game for him because of everything that he's meant to international basketball. So I thought that was pretty special and a really nice moment. But in terms of takeaways, the best teams are through. What did I say before? I thought France were the favourites along with the US, and obviously us. We back ourselves to beat any of them. And I told you Doncic was going to be a beast, and he's done it. He's, no matter what, it doesn't matter. Like, the whole team knows that it's centered around him, but he's just finding a way to beat teams. If you want to look at, you look at the way that he.
Well, Zoran was great yesterday. Goran's brother, Zoran was massive for them.
He got someone to come along with him.
25, 27, 30. He had a good game.
He's a special player. I think, the way that they don't have that much size, Slovenia, but
it's only Toby, right? And that's it.
But it's because Doncic does so much. Defensively, he rebounds like a beast. And in the FIBA game, because it's not so stretched out, there's no defensive three in the key, he can stay in front of guys much better. And then he can use his size to really affect guys shooting on top of him. So he's, in this style, he's become a better defensive player and a guy who, whenever he's on the floor, is a big-time problem. In this game against Germany, Germany played well against us, really ran out of gas against Slovenia in this game. But Doncic's numbers for this one, he really comes out and plays a good one. He only plays 33 minutes, struggles a bit from deep, only goes 2 for 7, but ends up a plus 26 on the floor. Drops 11 assists, 8 rebounds, a cruisy 20 points. He just controls the game. And I don't think there's anything that would suggest that he won't do the same thing in their semi-final matchup against France. I think that one is going to be a fascinating one to watch, because France have got an all-round team. They've got inside and outside punch, but can they stop Doncic? Can they stop him from leading his team to 80 or 90 points? That's an absolutely massive question. As good as you are, can you stop this one guy who's proved to be unstoppable so far? So who do you think gets the tip in that matchup, France versus Slovenia?
I like France. I think they can get it done. Look, they were very shaky against Italy yesterday. The game was. I think they had 20 plus turnovers, so they were really shooting themselves in the foot, France, and keeping an Italy team in it that probably shouldn't have been. Italy got back in the game against France and were managed to stay within touching distance because of your boy Danilo. So Gallinari hadn't done much this whole Olympics.
Where's he been?
Maybe he was just resting for the important matches. So, obviously played, if he didn't play 30 minutes, he played close to it off the bench, which meant they went with Les Melly at the 5. They just exclusively went with Gallo. So he was obviously able to provide him a nice spark and keep him in it. And obviously that they were trying to really execute that pull Gobert away from the basket, Gallo on the perimeter with the ball and Gobert matched up against him. They were trying to really open up that lane for other guys to get going. Nico Mannion was really bad for Italy, and the only other guy
True.
that was keeping him going, other than the lefty, I think is Polomero. I don't know what his name is, the lefty, but there was Polonara. Other than him, it was the guy that played well against Australia, and that's Fontecchio.
Yeah,
I think
cool
he's a
name,
guy that should
Fontecchio.
potentially look at getting a run in the NBA. He's shown good size anyway. I'm not sure if, obviously a lot of guys that are used to the FIBA game and growing up in Europe and playing the pros, you look at him and go, man, they would be great. But obviously, bringing him into the NBA, it's a completely different style of play. But I think there's something about him I really like. He seems to always be willing to take the big shot and seems to draw a lot of fouls anyway from perimeter. It seems as though he's baiting a lot of people in, and he seems to have smarts, understanding. Like one time Gobert got matched up on him yesterday, and he shot the ball to the bloody ceiling to get it over Gobert and knocked it down to his credit. And it was like, man, this guy just seems to be doing everything right, and was a really key part of Italy probably being in the quarterfinals, because especially you mentioned in the past, even though they're competitive, I'm just not sure how much we expected out of this Italy team. But yeah, they obviously did great, and it really helped. It really was France at the end who scored a garbage time bucket to push I think Gobert did a 360 dunk as sort of time was expiring.
That's right. Yeah.
To have the game. I think it was 9 points in the end they won, but it was obviously much closer than that.
Yeah, you're right. France definitely didn't play their best game in this one. They still got, 20 points out of Fournier, which you can pretty much pencil that in for every France game so far. And in the end, Gobert did get on top. Eventually the pick and roll became too hard to stop for Italy, given the 3-point shooting of France and the roll capability of Gobert. He ends up 10 for 13. Anytime you get 20 points out of him, he's dominating the rim and dunking it a lot, and they're extremely tough to stop. So that'll be a key for Slovenia. They need to make sure that their big guy Toby doesn't get in too much foul trouble, and they don't let Gobert run rampant inside, and hope that they can keep up with them scoring. I think that's probably been Slovenia's MO is try to score more than us, because Doncic is going to get his, and he's going to find our team. We're going to shoot about 43s in this game. If we get hot, you guys are in trouble. So interesting matchup. France will be feeling the pressure because they're definitely the favourites in this one, but I think Slovenia are a good chance of the upset.
Huge. Okay, so can we lock it in for you taking Slovenia, me taking France?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, big. Quick question. Do you think the Knicks realized that they're not getting FIBA Fournier, they're getting NBA Fournier when they signed him to 4 years, was it 70, 4 years 80?
I think they did. I think they did realize they got NBA Fournier, because even NBA Fournier, who's inconsistent, who hasn't done much in any of the playoff runs for Orlando, really looked lost when he got to that level of game.
Yeah.
Hasn't really ever played on a team that's got it all together, but also still, is 35 plus 3-point shooter basically his whole career, and a guy who can definitely get buckets. But that's basically all that the Knicks can attract. That's all that they can afford. And that's not to say that, Fournier isn't a valuable piece that lots of teams wanted. Boston picked him up at the end of last year for a reason, because the guy can play and they thought that he could help them out. But that's just the kind of level of player that New York can attract at this time, because of the roster that they've got, and obviously their history in the last 15, 20 years of incompetence in the front office. But I think it's a decent fit, and I think he'll be under a lot of pressure, because we know the scoring load that Julius Randle took on last year, but they were able to re-sign Burks, they were able to re-sign D Rose, and they were big parts of their offensive unit. Obviously losing Bullock. If you look at Bullock straight to Fournier, that's a bit of an upgrade, because Fournier is a bit of an all-round scorer. He can definitely score better in the mid-range. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I think the Knicks fans will probably be a little bit pissed off, hoping that they could have got Kyrie Irving or bloody Kevin Durant or something like that. But Fournier that's the right kind of signing in terms of where the Knicks are at. I think that makes sense for them, and it's not too crazy for the money. He was already getting 20 mil at Orlando. Yeah,
fair point. So the other semi-final, it's the US against the Boomers. Obviously, since we did the pod speaking about France upsetting the US in game one, and they obviously got back on track with a couple of big blowouts against Iran and the Czech Republic. How, I suppose, Well, this is obviously a much different US team in terms of the style of play and also the guys on their roster that Australia saw in Vegas for the exhibition. And I suppose, how worried are you about this matchup? Because, as confident as we are in Australia, we obviously have one less guy with Aaron Baines not playing. But how worried are you about this matchup? Because to me, it's scary. I think it would have been better if we had Spain.
I think this feels like a gold medal match for us because I'm about as confident as I could be in this group and what we've seen from them from the start of our first practice game to what we're looking at right now. And the way that we finished off that last game against Argentina, like, besides Baines being out, like, how much more happier could you be with the way that Paddy Mills is playing? Joe Ingles, in previous tournaments, he looked like he's gotten extremely tired and there's just been too big a load on him offensively that he's not able to give us 15 points in these medal contending games. I think he's in a good position, especially with that rest he got at the end of the last game. Obviously, Landau shooting the piss out of the ball right now, really stepping up for us. Nick Kay's playing really good form. And our guys off the bench lit it up last night, like Goulding, Sobey. They came in and did something. Exum had a huge dunk. He looks like he can hopefully give us that X factor that we need off the bench. Even Josh Green in small minutes did a couple of nice things. You couldn't be happier in terms of, or more confident in that we're going to give it our best go and we've got a genuine chance to knock this team off in a big game. On the flip side, I think you're absolutely right to be scared of what's happening with the US team, because this team make no ifs or buts about it. It's extremely talented and it's a lot better than the team that they sent to the World Cup only 2 years ago. I think the lineup that scares me more than anything has KD basically at the 5, has Draymond, who's definitely been, the heart and soul, and the reason that the US are playing a little bit better is definitely Draymond, the way that he's moving the ball. Complement that with Jason Tatum, the way that he's scoring the ball. Devin Booker, I thought, looked excellent in that game against Spain, and then Drew Holiday's ability to guard the other team's point guard. He looks like he's dangerous to get a steal every time, and the way that he's feeling himself offensively as well. Drew Holiday's ability to get to the basket and use his size. I think that overall lineup, that would win the NBA championship. I think that lineup, they're just so deep, got so much scoring, got so much defensive versatility. If there's any weakness in that lineup, it's, a big center who can score underneath the basket. And obviously, Baines is not a high volume scorer, but for a little fraction there, he would potentially be able to get those guys in foul trouble. So you're right, they're very scary, and I feel like Pop's worked out their rotation a bit better. Bam is that center that they need if they do have someone on the court for that position. Lillard's really been pushed out of the rotation because of his size. He's really a target for other teams to attack in this game. So it's interesting that he's not really playing many minutes, but I think it's the right move. And I think Levine's been excellent. I think him coming off the bench has looked dangerous, getting some steals, and he's really shooting the 3 ball well. He looks like a complete player. Levine as well, such a young, talented guy. This US team is definitely one to be feared. But I think we're going to take it right up to him. And then when it comes down to this matchup with us and them, not only do we need a big performance out of our forwards just to rebound and to finish around the rim, hopefully give us close to a dozen points and really defend and rebound hard. We actually basically need to outshoot these guys. We're going to have to take it up toe to toe. Mills is going to have to knock some down from 3. Ingles is going to have to knock some down. And because I think we can match it with them. We can match it with them defensively. We can play a tight game all the way through, and then it's going to come down who can hit the big time shots. I think Durant is obviously the key to all of this for the US. If he gets going, especially in the fourth quarter, there is no one in the world who can stop him. But at the same time, if we're able to get our guys going, get Paddy and get Joe going, then we're a team that can knock anyone off. And I'm confident that we have a good chance of doing that. So this will be a hell of a game. Definitely the game of the tournament, the game to watch. And as excited as I've been for a Boomers game probably ever.
Yeah. So I suppose the main bit of concern is if Drew Holiday takes out Paddy Mills, where's our offense? Like, that's kind of a little bit of a worry that I have off the bat. And, you saw a guy like Rubio drop 38 and go crazy and tried his best to lead Spain to an upset victory against the US in the quarters. But I think the variation to Rubio's game that's different to Paddy's is Rubio seems to be a little bit craftier in getting to the rim, whereas Paddy is very much a perimeter-based scorer and does his best work, obviously shooting the ball and hit step backs, whereas Rubio is going to be crafty and he's going to dribble along the baseline and then do a reverse with the right hand. And, it just feels like he's got a little bit more of that to his game. So I think that troubled the US definitely in the quarters, but I suppose they were kind of like, look, if it's Rubio beating us, but no one else, we would rather that than, Fernandez hitting some threes and Lul getting hot. And, they had Rodriguez off the bench that gave him a nice spark and hit some threes yesterday in particular. But outside of Rubio, Spain didn't get much. So I'm curious to know if they come with the sort of, well, do they go, stuff it. We let Paddy get off, but we don't let anyone else get hot. Like we give absolutely nothing to a guy like Jock, who's really been the number 2 guy, hasn't he, for a lot of this Olympics other than Paddy. And you obviously want to limit Ingles and his playmaking ability. So I just think, I wonder what they come in with, but we've seen at certain stages how stagnant the Australian offense can be. And it's a very much, give the ball to Paddy, end of the shot clock, let him bail us out. We didn't really need much of that yesterday. But, Paddy came out and hit a tough 3 to really kick things off for him personally. And he just seemed to be in a bit of a groove, but the whole team sort of lifted defensively. And that always seems to be when Matisse comes off the bench and he enters the floor, seems to be a massive spark. You talk about people coming off the bench and giving a spark offensively. He always comes off the bench and gives a spark defensively right away. So I like the thought of defense leading to easy offense in transition for the Boomers. But I think just when things slow down in the half court, how will we be able to get easy buckets? And maybe the answer is we won't. And it goes back to what you were saying, that the opportunities we get with shots, we've just got to make sure we knock them down.
Yeah, that's a really spot on analysis. I think when so much attention is drawn to a guy like Paddy, we need to rely on our finishing at the rim, because they don't necessarily have a lot of shot blocking. Durant's probably their best shot blocker. When we get Nick Kay and Landale on the rolls to the basket, and potentially, I don't know if Wraith is going to be in there for a minute or two, he needs to be able to finish those ones. When our shooters draw 2 defenders and we get it inside, we need to be able to finish and capitalize on those opportunities right around the rim. You're right. We hope that against every team in this, in this run, when we brought Thibault on, even when we played US in that practice game, we got a boost. We got a plus-minus boost because we were getting stops and getting easy transition buckets. So I think we'll be able to rely on that for a short spurt. But you're right. When it comes down to it, how are we gonna make those big time shots in the half court? And we might have to. Hopefully, we get a really hot game out of a guy like Goulding. He's a guy who's proven time and time again that he can knock down big shots, and hopefully we can get something from him. And if Landau can stretch some threes, that'd be excellent. I'm sure that Popovich has done his homework on Landau, considering they just signed him. So it'd be interesting to see what kind of defense gets thrown out at him. But this is going to be a hell of a game. It's going to be a real battle. And what can we do to get over this US team is shoot the ball really well and defend our absolute arse off and hopefully come down to the very end and find a hero somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Look, I'm not going to come out and say now that, the US is my prediction, but I'm just obviously very aware that it's no doubt the most difficult opponent. And it's, look, it's what Paddy said after the Argentina game last night. And everyone says it. If you want to be the best, you've got to beat the best. It's plain and simple. There's no way you win a gold medal by not beating a good opponent. You don't get an easy ride in these sort of tournaments. So somewhere along the way, you're going to come up against a tough opponent. And if it's not the US, and you manage to get through them, you're going to need to face a France or Slovenia in the final. So it doesn't necessarily get any easier. But yeah, this is by far the toughest challenge that the US, that Australia will face. So that game is it tomorrow or is it Friday? Do they get 2 days off between games?
I think they do. Let me just
I think the final is on this. I think the gold medal and bronze medal is on this weekend. So I'm just curious to know when is the semis, if that's tomorrow or Friday.
It's tomorrow afternoon. So 2:15 p.m. Australia time.
Interesting. See, they get a day
Tomorrow
off and then
afternoon.
they're back into it. Normally it's been 2 or 3 days between games so far. So obviously a shorter break and we'll see how they go. But goes without saying that. Did you say 2:15 as well? Sorry.
Yeah, 2:15.
Interesting.
And the France Slovenia game is after that, so that's at 9:00.
9
So
o'clock.
way later.
What's the 7-hour
Yeah.
gap? Well, I suppose if it's 2 hours and they finish
Yeah.
at 4.
Yeah, it's 9 o'clock. Yeah,
Interesting. Okay.
big gap.
Yep.
They both games will be rippers. Sure as hell hope Australia get through it. It's going to be a big game for Australian basketball. You know, we're definitely going to have a chance and a genuine chance to win that bronze if we don't get through them. But I feel like we're destined for gold if we're able to get over this US team.
Yeah. Well, either way, it's going to be a really tough matchup. I think if it's Slovenia or France in either the bronze medal or the gold medal, there's no real team that's easier. I think both are going to really test Australia. So I just hope that they can. No, it's all right. Let's bring on your
little
missus
guest
and
here.
get some analysis. She probably knows more than we do about ball dusk. The only other thing to potentially speak about is after the Olympics, things roll straight into Summer League, and then after that, there's a little bit of a hiatus and a break from basketball. So it's been an incredible run from, things kicking off in, if you want to even go back to bubble basketball, right? Bubble basketball was this time last year. They obviously then went into the finals and only had, I don't know what it was, 2 months off. Then the season kicked off. Then it went straight into the Olympics, draft, free agency. Summer League is back now. And in the States, and then there's going to be, 6 weeks off or a month off at least between middle to end of August to all the way through to training camp in September. So, before we know it, we'll be previewing the next upcoming season.
Good to see that we're back on getting back on the normal NBA calendar, 82 game season. It's going to be a lot for us to sink our teeth into, but it's also great to see a mix up and seeing this climax in the FIBA basketball. It's great for fans to see and great for us to talk about. Go the Aussies.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one Summer League game that everyone should tune into is Houston play Detroit in, I think, their second game. So obviously that's Cade against Jalen Green. And I'm not sure how many second-year guys from the Detroit group are going to be playing there, because you obviously have Sadiq Bey and Isaiah Stewart and then Killian, and then also for Houston, they made a few other interesting picks. Houston as well. They got the Turkish big man Alperen Sengun. So interesting. They took him as well, and I don't know if they'd be looking at playing anyone else, but interesting just to see that Cade against Jalen battle.
I'm interested to see Mobley as well. I didn't see a lot of him in college, so I'd really like to see how he goes. Yeah,
and it made sense just to kind of touch on them. They obviously re-signed Jared Allen to the big deal, so it's confident. It seems like they're confident that they can play those two together moving forward. Obviously, we've seen Evan be able to really switch out onto the perimeter and be able to defend a lot of different guys in college. So it doesn't seem like they're too worried about going with two, 7-footers on the floor at the same time.
Interesting prospect. We'll see where Cleveland can go if they can finally get some direction. And I think guy that we touched on, Nance Jr. will be a piece that'll be moved to a different team.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we'll obviously be back in a short time. I don't know when we'll be back to the next pod, but I'm sure there'll be plenty of news that'll be dropped between now and then anyway, outside of obviously what goes on with the Olympics. And we just mentioned a few of the guys, whether it be a Schroeder or whether it be a Reggie Jackson or even the restricted free agency guys that we mentioned with John Collins and who did we say? Markkanen. So there's obviously a few names left out there, and we'll see what goes down in the interim.
Yep, keep your eyes peeled and listen up for our next pod when we drop. But hope you guys enjoyed listening.
Yep.
Oh, got to get my J on to finish it.
Yeah.
If I make this, we're getting the medal. Let's go. Yes.
There we
go.
Gold, bronze, or silver, doesn't matter. I'm sure the boys would be pumped to get one either way. So thanks, everyone. Speak to you soon.
Peace out.